Stories about the paranormal continue to haunt people and turn their nights restless. Nightmares follow some in broad daylight, and sounds of distant whispers grow louder with every passing minute, every passing day. While some are petrified by glowing flames in the dead of the night, others find strange noises following them every night. These real paranormal stories are some proof of what follows you around every day, ready to strike at any moment. Ready to dive into darkness? A couple of years ago, my buddy Jake and I decided to camp on a small, secluded island in the middle of a lake way out in the countryside. We'd been there a few times before. It was the perfect escape from everything. The only way to access the island was by climbing over an old, broken-down car bridge that had partially collapsed into the water. It wasn't exactly the safest route, but it was part of the adventure. We arrived late in the afternoon, set up our tent, and got a fire going just before sunset. The place felt isolated, but peaceful, as it always did. Once it got late, around 11 or 12 at night, we sat by the fire, eating some of the food we'd cooked and chatting about nothing in particular. That's when we noticed it. Something moved about 20 feet away, just beyond the firelight's glow. At first, it was subtle, like a flicker of light, but then we both saw them clearly. Two small, white orbs of light, side by side. They bobbed up and down slightly, but what struck me immediately was how unnatural they looked. They weren't flashlights. There was no beam, no directionality. They were just glowing spheres hovering in the air. We froze, our conversations dying mid-sentence. Jake whispered, "Eric, did you see that?" I nodded, barely breathing. The lights didn't just stay there. They started moving, slowly at first, circling the edge of our campsite like they were studying us. I stood up, my voice cracking as I shouted, "Who's there?" Jake joined in, yelling the same thing, but there was no response. Nothing. If it had been a person, we'd have at least heard them moving through the underbrush or some kind of acknowledgement. But these lights moved silently, gliding over the ground. They circled us once, then began to move faster. At one point, they passed through the edge of the water without breaking the surface, like the law of physics didn't apply to them. Panic set in as the lights moved closer to the woods, then back toward us, darting unnervingly fast and smooth. It was random. It was like they were trying to unnerve us, and it worked. "Let's go," Jake said, his voice low and urgent. We started packing in a frenzy, haphazardly throwing things into our bags. But then the lights did something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. They moved together, heading straight up a steep hill at the island's edge. The incline was almost vertical, but they glided upward like it was nothing. They didn't slow down, didn't wobble. They just disappeared over the crest of the hill and into the woods. We didn't wait to see if they would come back. Grabbing whatever we could carry, we bolted for the broken bridge. Crossing it at night was terrifying enough, but we didn't care. I kept glancing over my shoulder the whole way, half expecting to see those lights chasing us, but they didn't. By the time we reached the safety of the mainland, we were drenched in sweat, our hearts pounding like we just ran a marathon. We didn't talk much on the drive home. We just exchanged a few stunned sentences about what we'd seen. Jake tried to rationalize it, saying it could have been fireflies or maybe some weird reflection, but we both knew that wasn't it. Fireflies don't move like that, and reflections don't climb hills or glide through water. Whatever we saw that night, it wasn't natural. I haven't been back to that island since, and neither has my friend. To this day, I don't know what those lights were, and honestly, I don't want to know. All I know is that something was out there, with us, something we weren't supposed to see. I've always been fascinated by ghost stories, but experiencing one yourself is an entirely different experience. It's one thing to hear tales of the supernatural and quite another to have your own home transformed into the setting of a horror movie. 3 years ago, my wife Beth and I moved into a house built in 1890. From day one, it had an undeniable charm. High ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and a rich history embedded in its walls. Occasionally, we'd hear odd sounds, faint creaks in the floorboards, the subtle groan of the walls as if the house itself were alive. We always joked that it was just the ghosts, but neither of us took it seriously. At least not until things began to escalate. One night, Beth and I were watching TV downstairs. Around midnight, I decided to head up to bed while she stayed to finish the show. I climbed under the covers and lay there scrolling through my phone, my back to the door. After a few minutes, I heard the familiar sound of footsteps entering the bedroom. The bed dipped slightly as if someone was sitting beside me. Assuming it was Beth, I didn't even turn around. But then I heard the kitchen sink turn on downstairs. My stomach dropped. Slowly, I turned to look at the spot on the bed where I thought Beth had sat. It was empty. I bolted upright, heart pounding. I called out to Beth, and sure enough, she answered from the kitchen. She hadn't even come upstairs yet. I couldn't explain it, and the incident left me deeply unsettled, though time dulled the edge of the fear. Until December 22nd of last year, that night we headed to bed around 11:30 p.m. Barely 5 minutes after lying down, we heard a loud, unmistakable sound. One of our kids' scooters shooting across the hardwood floor in the dining room below. It wasn't the kind of noise you could brush off as a toy rolling on its own. It sounded deliberate, like someone had forcefully pushed it. Beth and I sat up simultaneously, adrenaline surging. I grabbed the gun from the bedside drawer while she armed herself with nothing but sheer determination. We crept downstairs, clearing each room methodically. Our house was small, just 1,200 square feet with little storage space, so there weren't too many places to hide. Yet, we found nothing. We tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to anything other than what it felt like. But minutes after returning to bed, we heard heavy, deliberate footsteps ascending the staircase. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to be quiet. We froze, exchanging wide-eyed looks of disbelief. As the footsteps reached the top of the stairs, Beth leaped out of bed, ready to confront the intruder. I followed close behind, gun in hand. I turned the corner to face whoever had invaded our home, and there was no one there. My heart raced as we cleared the house again, every inch thoroughly searched. But just like before, there was no trace of anyone. No sounds of retreating steps, no open windows or doors. It was as if whoever, or whatever, had been on the stairs had simply vanished. Determined to sleep, or at least try, we returned to bed and set up a makeshift barricade, the baby gate at the top of the stairs. We figured it would at least buy us some time or make noise if someone tried to climb it. Half an hour later, a loud noise echoed from my office across the hall. My pulse spiked as I grabbed Beth. We flung the door open together. Inside, the exhaust fan on my laser cutter, a machine I hadn't touched in 6 months, was running at full blast. I owned the machine for years, and nothing like this has ever happened before. That night made us believers. Every creak and whisper of sound in the house seemed amplified, charged with meaning. Beth resorted to staging the house, something neither of us had ever done before. The activity has since quieted, but we still sleep with one ear open, waiting for the next unexplained event.